The morning sun cut through my bedroom window like a knife, and I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. It was the noise, children's laughter, the creak of swing sets, voices calling out in a way that didn't belong on my property. I lived alone on 8 acres of inherited land in rural Virginia, the kind of place where silence was golden and neighbors respected boundaries. My grandfather, a decorated Air Force colonel, had left me this land with one simple instruction written in his will. Protect it, Marcus. No matter what they tell you, this land matters more than you know. I threw on jeans and a shirt, my heart already pounding as I walked toward my back window. What I saw made my blood run cold. Where there had been nothing but wild grass and old oak trees yesterday, there now stood a massive playground, bright red slides, yellow swings, a jungle gym that looked like it cost more than my truck. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the fence. A brand new chain-link fence ran across my property line, cutting through land that had been in my family for 60 years. And on that fence hung a cheerful sign, Meadowbrook HOA Community Park, all residents welcome. I didn't live in Meadowbrook. I didn't live in any HOA. My property was a private parcel, completely separate from the cookie-cutter subdivision that had sprung up a quarter-mile away 5 years ago. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the property documents I kept in my files, the survey maps, the deed, everything. My hands shook as I traced the boundary lines. This playground wasn't just near my property, it was on my property. At least 2 acres of my land had been swallowed up by this construction. I stormed outside, my bare feet hitting the dew-wet grass as I approached the fence. A woman in yoga pants and a visor was pushing a toddler on one of the swings. She looked up at me with a bright, entitled smile. "Good morning. Beautiful day, isn't it? The HOA really outdid themselves with this park." I stared at her, my voice tight with rage I was barely controlling. "This is my property. You're trespassing." Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face like she couldn't quite process what I was saying. "What? No, this is HOA land. They sent out emails about it months ago. They even had a ribbon-cutting ceremony last weekend." Before I could respond, a white SUV pulled up to the park's entrance, and out stepped a man in khakis and a polo shirt embroidered with Meadowbrook HOA President Richard Kemper. He had that particular kind of confidence that comes from never being told no, the kind of man who believed rules were suggestions that applied to other people. He walked toward me with an outstretched hand and a politician's grin. "You must be Marcus Chen. I'm Richard. I've been meaning to introduce myself." I ignored his hand. "Get off my property, all of you, and tear down that playground before I call the sheriff." Richard's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This land was acquired through an easement agreement with the county. We have all the proper paperwork. The HOA purchased the development rights and—" I cut him off, my voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what paperwork you think you have. This is my land, my grandfather's land, and you built this without my permission, without even contacting me." Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward me. "The county records show this parcel as designated community space. See? Right here, parcel 7742B, approved for recreational use." I looked at the document on his screen and my stomach dropped. It looked official, county stamps, legal language, survey numbers. But something was off. The parcel number was close to mine, but not exact. Mine was 7742A. This was listed as 7742B, which according to my deed, didn't exist. "This is fraud," I said quietly. "You've falsified documents to steal my land." Richard's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something much uglier underneath. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Chen. I'd be very careful about making claims like that. The HOA has extensive legal resources, and we don't take kindly to residents who try to obstruct community improvements." "I'm not a resident of your community," I shot back. "I'm a private landowner, and you've committed trespass and possibly criminal fraud." Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "You're going to want to think very carefully about how you proceed here. This playground serves 43 families. You try to take it away, you're going to make a lot of enemies. People who know where you live, people who vote in local elections and sit on county boards. Do you really want that kind of attention?" The threat hung in the air between us, ugly and unmistakable. Before I could respond, something caught my eye, movement beyond the tree line on the far edge of my property. A vehicle, black and unmarked, parked in the shadows where the old access road used to run. As I squinted toward it, the vehicle's engine started, and it rolled backward into the deeper woods, disappearing. Richard followed my gaze but said nothing, though I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "I'm calling my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone. "And the sheriff. This conversation is over." As I walked back toward my house, I could feel dozens of eyes on my back. Parents at the playground, Richard still standing by the fence, and somewhere in those woods, whoever had been watching in that black vehicle. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. "This land matters more than you know." For the first time since inheriting the property, I wondered what he'd really meant. And as I reached my porch, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small metal marker driven into the ground near my back fence line, barely visible in the tall grass. It was military issue, weathered but unmistakable, with a serial number and a warning. U.S. government property, authorized personnel only, beyond this point restricted area. My blood turned to ice as the realization hit me. This wasn't just about a playground or an HOA. This was about something my grandfather had kept hidden, something he'd protected for decades. And now, by building their playground, the HOA hadn't just trespassed on my property, they'd trespassed into something far more dangerous. I pulled up my grandfather's will on my phone, reading the words I'd glossed over 100 times. The land must remain undisturbed. Should anyone attempt to build or excavate, contact Colonel Sarah Martinez at the number below immediately. Do not delay. Lives depend on it. With shaking hands, I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Major Martinez, Restricted Operations Division, identification code?" I had no code. I had no idea what I was even calling about. But I knew with absolute certainty that my peaceful morning had just become the beginning of something that would change everything. "My name is Marcus Chen," I said quietly, watching Richard and the other HOA members through my window, completely unaware of what they'd stumbled into. "My grandfather was Colonel James Chen, and I think we have a serious problem." Section 2. The military arrives. 1,000 plus words. Major Sarah Martinez arrived exactly 90 minutes after my phone call, and she didn't arrive alone. 3 black SUVs pulled up my driveway in formation, followed by a truck carrying 4 soldiers in full tactical gear. The playground had been in full swing moments before, children laughing, parents chatting, the sound of suburban normalcy. Now it was silent. Every parent had stopped mid-push on the swings, every conversation had died, as they watched armed military personnel exit vehicles and begin setting up a perimeter around my property. I met Martinez on my front porch. She was shorter than I expected, maybe 5'6", but she carried herself with the kind of authority that made her seem 10 feet tall. Her uniform was crisp, decorated with ribbons I didn't recognize, and her eyes were sharp and calculating as they swept across the playground and the gathering crowd of confused residents. "Mr. Chen," she said, extending her hand, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Your grandfather was a good man and a brilliant officer. I assume he never told you about the facility?" "Facility?" I echoed, confusion mixing with dread. "What facility?" Martinez's jaw tightened. "Let's talk inside." She gestured to one of her soldiers, a tall man with lieutenant bars. "Cortez, establish a 200-meter cordon. No one in or out until we've completed the assessment." As we walked into my house, I could hear Richard Kemper's voice rising in protest. "This is outrageous. You can't just shut down a public park. I'm calling the county commissioner right now." Martinez didn't even glance back. "Tell him to call the Pentagon, Mr. Kemper. This is now a federal matter." Inside my living room, Martinez pulled out a tablet and began swiping through documents. "How much did your grandfather tell you about his service?" she asked. I sat down heavily on the couch, my mind reeling. "Not much. He was Air Force, worked in intelligence during the Cold War. He retired in 1991, moved out here, kept to himself. He died 3 years ago and left me this land." Martinez nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. "Your grandfather didn't just work in intelligence, Mr. Chen. He was the commanding officer of a highly classified research installation. This land," she gestured out the window, "sits directly above an underground facility that was never decommissioned." The room seemed to tilt around me. "Underground? Here? That's impossible. I've lived here for 3 years. I've never seen anything, never heard anything." Martinez interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "That's because it's sealed. Has been since 1989, but sealed doesn't mean empty, and it certainly doesn't mean safe. She pulled up a map on her tablet showing my property with layers of underground schematics beneath it. The facility was massive. Tunnels, chambers, rooms labeled with designations I didn't understand. "What was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What did they do down there?" Martinez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Advanced weapons research, specifically chemical and biological containment testing. During the Cold War, we needed secure locations to study Soviet agents' potential bioweapons and develop countermeasures. This facility was one of 12 such sites across the country. My grandfather's house suddenly felt contaminated, poisoned by secrets buried beneath my feet. "But you said it was sealed," I managed. "So what's the problem?" Martinez zoomed in on the map, highlighting a section of the playground, specifically the area where they dug the foundation for the jungle gym. "The problem, Mr. Chen, is that your HOA excavated directly into the outer containment barrier. They're about 6 feet from breaching the primary seal." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "What happens if they breach it?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Martinez's expression was grave. "The containment chambers were designed to hold material indefinitely under strict environmental conditions. If those conditions are compromised, if fresh air, moisture, or biological contaminants are introduced, we could be looking at an active release scenario." There was a sharp knock on the door, and Lieutenant Cortez entered, his face pale. "Ma'am, we have a situation. One of the civilians broke through the perimeter. He's demanding to speak with you, and he's brought a lawyer." Martinez stood, her posture shifting into combat readiness. "Kemper?" Cortez nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And he's threatening to sue for wrongful detention and violation of civil liberties." Martinez's smile was cold. "Show him in." Richard Kemper stormed into my living room like he owned it, a thin man in an expensive suit trailing behind him. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Richard began, not even bothering with pleasantries. "You have no authority to shut down a legally permitted public facility. My attorney, David Grossman, specializes in federal overreach cases, and we are prepared to—" Martinez cut him off with a single raised hand. "Mr. Kemper, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen very carefully. Your playground is built on top of a decommissioned military research facility containing Class 4 biohazardous materials. By excavating without authorization, you have endangered not just yourself, but every person in a 5-mile radius." The color drained from Richard's face. The lawyer, Grossman, stepped forward. "That's a very serious claim, Major. I'll need to see documentation before my client—" Martinez thrust her tablet into his hands. "Restricted Access Authorization 7742 Alpha, filed under the National Security Act of 1947, updated 1989. This property and everything beneath it is federal jurisdiction. Your client built an unauthorized structure on restricted government land. That's not a civil matter, Mr. Grossman, that's a federal crime." Grossman scrolled through the documents, his confidence visibly crumbling with each swipe. Richard, meanwhile, had gone from red-faced anger to ashen fear. "But we had permits," he whispered. "The county approved everything. We checked the records." Martinez retrieved her tablet. "You checked civilian records, which don't include classified military installations. Tell me, Mr. Kemper, how deep did you excavate for that jungle gym?" Richard's voice trembled. 8 feet, maybe 9. We hit some kind of metal and decided not to go deeper." The room went deathly quiet. Martinez turned to Cortez. "Get the CBRN team suited up immediately. We need a full integrity assessment of the containment barrier, and we need it now." Cortez practically ran from the room. Martinez turned back to Richard, her voice like ice. "The metal you hit was the outer containment shell. If you've compromised it, we're looking at a potential evacuation of every resident within a 10-mile radius. Your families, your homes, everything." Richard collapsed into a chair, his lawyer standing frozen beside him. "What do we do?" Richard asked, all his bluster gone, replaced by naked terror. Martinez looked at me, then back at him. "You pray that your contractors were sloppy and didn't actually breach anything, and you hope that whatever's been sealed in those chambers for 36 years is still stable." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Kemper, tea? What do we do?" Richard asked, all his bluster gone, replaced by naked terror. Martinez looked at me, then back at him. "You pray that your contractors were sloppy and didn't actually breach anything, and you hope that whatever's been sealed in those chambers for 36 years is still stable." She moved toward the door, then then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Kemper? That playground doesn't come down until we've determined it's safe to do so. If we start demolition and disturb the wrong thing, we could trigger exactly what we're trying to prevent." Through the window, I could see the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear response team assembling, men and women in full hazmat suits preparing to enter my backyard. Families were being evacuated from the playground, children crying as they were led away by soldiers, parents demanding answers no one could give them. My quiet life had become a nightmare in the span of hours, and the worst part was knowing it was about to get much, much worse. Martinez caught my eye as she headed for the door. "Your grandfather spent his entire retirement standing guard over this secret, Mr. Chen. Now it's your turn. I hope you're ready for what comes next." By sunset, my property had been transformed into a military compound. Floodlights mounted on portable towers bathed everything in harsh white light, turning my peaceful 8 acres into something that looked like a war zone. The CBRN team had been working for 6 hours, and I could see the tension in every soldier's posture as they moved around the playground equipment. The neighborhood had gone from confused to angry to terrified. News vans were parked just beyond the military perimeter, reporters doing stand-ups with my house in the background, spinning wild theories about everything from terrorist attacks to alien artifacts. Martinez had set up a command center in my garage, computers and communications equipment filling every available surface. I sat at my own kitchen table, feeling like a stranger in my own home, when Lieutenant Cortez entered, his face grim. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Martinez followed him outside, and after a moment's hesitation, I did too. The CBRN team had erected a portable containment tent around the jungle gym, and through the clear plastic walls, I could see them working around something in the ground. As we approached, one of the technicians, a woman whose name tape read Specialist Hayes, emerged from the tent, carrying a sealed container. "We found the breach point," Hayes reported, her voice muffled by her hazmat suit. "The construction crew used auger drilling for the jungle gym supports. One of the augers punched clean through the containment shell. There's a 3-inch hole extending approximately 7 feet down into the barrier." Martinez's jaw clenched. "Active contamination?" Hayes hesitated. "That's the strange part, ma'am. We're not detecting any biological agents, no chemical signatures, nothing on the radiation sensors, but there's airflow. Something is equalizing pressure between the facility and the surface." "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Martinez turned to me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. "It means the seal has been compromised, but we don't know what that's released, if anything. The facility's environmental system should have shut down decades ago, but if there's active airflow..." She trailed off, looking back at the tent. "We need to go inside. We need to see what's down there." The words sent a chill down my spine. "My grandfather sealed it for a reason," I said. "Maybe we should just reseal the breach and leave it alone." Martinez shook her head. "If the containment has been compromised, we need to know the extent of the damage. We need to know if there's an active threat." She turned to Cortez. "Get me the engineering team. We're going to need a way down." Over the next 3 hours, I watched as military engineers used ground-penetrating radar to map the facility beneath my property. What they found was staggering. The underground complex was enormous. Over 40,000 square feet of tunnels and chambers spreading out in all directions from a central hub that sat almost directly beneath my house. There were access points, Martinez explained, but they'd all been sealed with concrete and steel 36 years ago, all except one. The original primary entrance had been built into a hillside on the far edge of my property, hidden behind what I'd always thought was just an old root cellar covered in vines and vegetation. "Your grandfather was clever," Martinez said as we stood in front of the entrance. Engineers had cleared away decades of growth, revealing a massive steel door set into reinforced concrete. Military designation numbers were still visible, weathered but readable. "Research Installation Bravo 7, authorized personnel only," a warning placard beneath. I stared at her. "You're kidding." She wasn't kidding. 20 minutes later, a technician took a blood sample from my finger, ran it through a portable lab setup, and loaded the genetic profile into a modified card reader beside the door. There was a moment of terrible silence, and then a sound I'll never forget. The grinding of mechanisms that hadn't moved in decades, the hiss of pressure equalization, and finally, with a groan like the earth itself was protesting, the door began to open. The smell hit us first. Not decay or rot like I'd expected, but something else. Antiseptic, chemical, with an underlying scent of ozone like after a lightning strike. Martinez, Cortez, and 2 CBRN specialists entered first, their equipment scanning constantly. After a tense minute, Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. "Atmosphere is breathable. No immediate biological or chemical hazards detected. Mr. Chen, you're going to want to see this." I stepped through the doorway into my grandfather's secret, and my world tilted on its axis. The entrance chamber was pristine, as if someone had been maintaining it daily rather than abandoning it decades ago. Fluorescent lights flickered to life as we entered, triggered by motion sensors that somehow still worked. The walls were lined with warning posters from the 1980s, instructions for emergency decontamination procedures, and a map of the facility that made my head spin with its complexity. But it was what I saw in the central corridor that made my blood run cold. Boot prints. Fresh boot prints in the dust, leading deeper into the facility. Someone had been down here recently. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. Martinez saw them at the same moment I did. Her hand went to her sidearm. "Cortez, we have evidence of unauthorized access. Get more security down here now." She turned to me, her expression deadly serious. "Mr. Chen, did your grandfather ever mention anyone else having access to this facility? Any other family members, colleagues, anyone?" I shook my head, but even as I did, a memory surfaced. 3 years ago, at my grandfather's funeral, there had been a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit. He'd stood at the back of the service, watching. When I'd approached him after, he'd introduced himself as an old friend of James, offered his condolences, and left before I could get his name. I described him to Martinez. "Did he seem military?" she asked. "Former intelligence, maybe?" I thought back, trying to remember details. Maybe. He had that bearing, like he was always watching, always assessing. Martinez's expression darkened. "We need to secure this facility immediately. If someone has been accessing it, if they know what's down here..." She was cut off by a shout from deeper in the corridor. One of the CBRN specialists came running back, his eyes wide behind his face shield. "Major, you need to see this. The containment chambers have been opened. They've been opened from the inside." The words didn't make sense. Opened from the inside? The facility had been abandoned, sealed, empty for 36 years. There was no inside to open them from. We ran deeper into the complex, following the specialist through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The facility was a maze of labs, storage rooms, and decontamination chambers, all eerily preserved like a museum exhibit. And then we reached the primary containment area, and I understood why the specialist had been running. The massive vault door stood open, its locking mechanisms intact but disengaged. Beyond it lay a chamber that had clearly once held something important, something dangerous. Storage tanks, empty now, lined the walls. Examination tables, also empty, stood in neat rows, and on every surface, covering every piece of equipment, was a message written in what looked like permanent marker. "They're not gone, they're waiting." Clemens was right. Martinez photographed everything, her hands steady despite the tremor I could hear in her voice. "Clemens," she muttered. "Dr. Elizabeth Clemens. She was the chief research scientist here, worked under your grandfather. She opposed the facility's closure, claimed the research wasn't complete, that sealing the subjects without proper termination protocols was dangerous." Cortez stepped forward. "What subjects, ma'am?" The file said this was chemical and biological weapons research. Martinez turned to face us, and in that moment I saw fear in her eyes. Real, genuine fear. "That was the cover story," she said quietly. "The truth was classified above top secret. This facility wasn't studying weapons. It was studying something else, something we found but never fully understood." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "In 1987, a Soviet defector brought us biological samples recovered from a meteor impact site in Siberia. Samples that contained something that wasn't quite alive but wasn't quite dead either, something that..." The breathing sound grew louder, closer, and with it came another sound, footsteps, but wrong somehow, the rhythm off, like someone learning to walk for the first time. Through the darkness, I saw movement at the far end of the corridor. A figure, humanoid, but wrong, its proportions slightly off, its movements too fluid, too deliberate. It stepped into the edge of my flashlight beam, and I saw its face. Or rather, I saw the face it was wearing, because I recognized it. It was the man from my grandfather's funeral, the stranger who'd called himself an old friend of James. Except this thing wasn't human anymore. Its eyes were black, completely black, with no whites, no iris. Its skin seemed to shift and ripple like oil on water. And when it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of whispers underlying a single vocal tone. "Hello, Marcus," it said, and its mouth didn't quite sync with the words. "Your grandfather tried so hard to keep us buried, but we've been patient. We've been waiting. And now, thanks to those fools and their playground, we're finally free." Martinez had her weapon drawn before the thing finished speaking, but she didn't fire. Training, I realized. She was trying to assess the threat, trying to understand what she was facing. The creature that wore the stranger's face tilted its head at an angle that was just slightly too far, studying us with those bottomless black eyes. "Shooting me would be pointless, Major Martinez," it said, the whispers beneath its voice growing louder. "This body is just a vessel, a convenient form. Destroying it would only force me to find another." "What are you?" Martinez demanded, her voice steady despite the impossible situation. The creature smiled, and the expression was all wrong, too wide, showing too many teeth. "We are what your species discovered in the void between stars, what your scientists tried to contain, to study, to weaponize. We are the confluence." It took a step forward, and I noticed that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. It was floating, hovering just a fraction of an inch above the floor. "Your grandfather understood. Colonel Chen knew we couldn't be destroyed, only contained. But containment requires constant vigilance and time. Time is something you humans are so beautifully vulnerable to." Cortez moved to flank the creature, his weapon also drawn. "Ma'am, we need to evacuate and collapse the facility." The confluence laughed, and the sound echoed from every surface, multiplying until it filled the entire corridor. "Collapse it? Oh, Lieutenant, you don't understand. We're not confined to this facility anymore. We've been free for months. That man you recognized, Marcus, we took him 6 months before your grandfather's funeral. We've been preparing, learning, integrating ourselves into your world." It gestured toward the open vault. "Your HOA didn't accidentally find this place. We guided them here. We manipulated the county records. We planted the idea of the playground. We ensured they would dig exactly where they needed to." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "The breach was intentional," I whispered. "You wanted them to find this place." The confluence nodded, that too wide smile never faltering. "Your grandfather's genetic lock was inconvenient. We needed someone with Chen DNA to open the facility fully. We needed you, Marcus. The playground, the HOA, the conflict, all of it designed to bring you here, to make you angry enough to investigate, to eventually lead military personnel down into our home." Martinez's jaw clenched. How many of you are out there?" The creature's smile finally faded, replaced by something that might have been pity. "How many drops of water in the ocean, Major? We are singular in multitude. Every person we integrate becomes part of the confluence. We share their memories, their knowledge, their connections." It took another step forward, and now I could see that its shadow didn't match its body. The shadow was larger, with too many limbs, constantly shifting and writhing. "But don't worry, we're not conquerors. We're not here to destroy humanity. We're here to join with it, to merge, to create something new, something better." "That's not happening," Martinez said flatly. She keyed her radio. "Command, this is Martinez. We have an active biological entity, possibly infectious, possibly sentient. Recommend immediate containment protocols and..." The radio exploded in a burst of static and a sound like screaming. The confluence's smile returned. "Your communications won't work down here anymore, Major. We control the electromagnetic spectrum within these walls. You're isolated." It gestured back toward the entrance we'd come through. "But please, feel free to try to leave. We're curious to see how you respond to obstacles." We ran. There was no shame in it, no hesitation. We ran back through the corridors, our flashlights cutting wild arcs through the darkness as the facility's lights continued to flicker on and off in random patterns. Behind us, I could hear the confluence following, but not chasing. It was pacing us, staying just close enough to keep us terrified, but not so close that we'd turn and fight. It was playing with us, studying us, and that was somehow worse than if it had attacked outright. We burst back into the entrance chamber, expecting to see the door and freedom beyond. Instead, we found something that made my heart sink. The massive steel door had closed, and standing in front of it were 3 more figures. people I recognized from the neighborhood. Janet Holloway, who lived 2 houses down from the Meadowbrook entrance. Tom Briggs, the neighborhood handyman everyone hired for odd jobs. And Rebecca Sutter, the elementary school teacher whose daughter had been on the playground that morning. All three had the same black eyes, the same wrong movements, the same oil-slick skin. "You're beginning to understand," the confluence said, emerging from the corridor behind us. Now there were 4 of them, boxing us in. "We've been integrating for months. Key individuals, people with access and influence, the HOA president." Richard Kemper, I realized with horror. That's why he'd been so insistent on the playground, why he'd pushed so hard despite the warnings. Was one of our first. He made everything so much easier. Martinez was scanning constantly, looking for any way out. "The genetic lock on the door," she said suddenly. "Marcus, you can override it. You can open it." I moved toward the door, but the confluence that wore Janet Holloway's face blocked my path. "Oh, you can try, Marcus, but consider this. We've been studying your species for decades from within this facility. We know your psychology, your weaknesses. Up there, beyond that door, are dozens of people from Meadowbrook, children, families, your neighbors." Its smile was predatory. "How many of them do you think are still human? How many have we already integrated? If you open that door, if you let military forces flood into this area, how will they tell the difference between the infected and the uninfected? How much collateral damage are you willing to accept?" The question hung in the air like poison. Martinez moved beside me, her voice low. "It's bluffing. It has to be." But she didn't sound certain. The confluence laughed. "Am I? Let's ask the lieutenant. Cortez, you spoke to your wife before coming down here, didn't you? Called her to let her know you'd be late for dinner?" Cortez's face went pale. She said she understood, that she'd wait for me." The confluence nodded. "And when you hung up, did you notice anything unusual? Any slight change in her speech pattern, perhaps? A delay in her responses?" Cortez's hand shook on his weapon. "No, that's not possible. I spoke to her just—" The confluence cut him off. "6 hours ago, Lieutenant. 6 hours since we visited your home and had a lovely conversation with Maria. 6 hours since she became part of us." Cortez let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Martinez caught his arm before he could do something reckless. "Stay focused, Lieutenant. We don't know that it's telling the truth." "But you don't know that I'm lying either," the confluence countered. "That's the beauty of our method, Major. The doubt, the uncertainty. How can you fight an enemy that looks exactly like everyone you love? How can you trust anyone?" It gestured to the door. "You could open it. You could try to evacuate the area, quarantine everyone. But how do you quarantine an entire community? How do you test for integration? We don't show up on blood tests. We don't trigger immune responses. We simply are." I felt something in my pocket, my phone. I pulled it out, saw that despite the confluence's claim about controlling electromagnetics, I had a signal. Weak, but present. I had received messages, dozens of them, from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened one at random. It was a photo of Richard Kemper's wife, Helen, standing in their kitchen with their 2 children. All 4 had black eyes. The message read, "Thank you for keeping the playground. The children love it. H." Martinez saw the photo over my shoulder and her face went ashen. "How many?" she whispered. The confluence spread its arms wide. "Enough. Not everyone yet. We're not monsters, despite what you might think. But enough that any military response would be catastrophic. Enough that you can't simply bomb this facility and hope for the best." It moved closer, and I could smell something like copper and electricity. "We're offering you a choice, Marcus Chen. You can fight us, try to resist, and watch as we're forced to integrate more and more people to protect ourselves.